Brian O'Leary is a former astronaut who quit before going to space and went instead to college to teach astronomy. He's here to lobby and to demonstrate.
I wanted to just drop everything I was doing, to sacrifice my salary as a faculty member at Cornell, and to protest this war, to go on Capitol Hill, to lobby with senators and congressmen. And this is what I intend to do for many weeks to come.
This is Spectrum.
Alternative medicine, homeopathy, secrets, society, hypnosis, the paranormal, alternative energy, UFO, abduction, the weird, the wild, and the wonderful.
With your hosts, Tom Theophanis and Scott Jordan.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Spectrum Radio Network on BBS Radio 2. I'm Scott Jordan, here with my co-host, Tom Theophanis, and remember, there's no such thing as too much information. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm good. What do we got tonight?
Tonight's guest is Dr. Brian O'Leary. He has such an extensive list of accolades that it will take me a long time to go through them, so I'm going to give you a short version of them. He's an author, a scientist, a former astronaut, and an international speaker. He has taught as an assistant professor of astronomy at Cornell University alongside Carl Sagan. He has published over 100 technical papers in the peer-reviewed scientific literature and another 100 popular magazine and op-ed pieces worldwide. He has appeared frequently on American national television and radio, including The Today Show, Larry King Live, The Donahue Show, and Art Bell Show. Over the past 20 years, Dr. O'Leary has researched, lectured, and written extensively about the new paradigms of science and global transformation. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, Scott. Hi, Tom.
How you doing? I think what I'd like to start out with is a little bit of history. Maybe talk about where you started in the early days and then work it up to today.
Well, yes, I was brought up in a time, I'm now 71 years old, so I was born in 1940, and during the 50s and 60s, I just had this huge interest in space. I wanted to go into space. I wanted to go to the moon, go to Mars. Everybody thought I was crazy because most of this was before Sputnik. And when Sputnik went up in 1957, I really got into my ambition to become an astronaut, to become a scientist, which I did. I became a scientist and I became an astronaut in 1967, appointed to go to Mars after I'd completed a PhD thesis about Mars. And then the U.S. got involved in Vietnam, and that was the beginning of my disillusionment with the priorities of what the government is spending money on, the enormous power of vested interests. So little by little through the years, and I had a number of academic appointments in various astronomy and physics departments, Cornell, Princeton, and a number of other places. During the 60s and 70s, it occurred to me toward 1980 that none of them were really working. And so I had to do some deep soul searching about why. And the answer I came up with was that the science that I was getting increasingly interested in was heretical from the point of view of the traditional mainstream academic world. And so around the late 70s, early 80s, I got more and more involved in some of the sciences of consciousness, of healing, of the possibility of creating energy from the vacuum, creating energy from water, and purifying water through positive intention, and on it went. And around that time, I left Princeton, and I was on my own. It was kind of a rude awakening because I had kids to send to college, and I was doing stuff that was just plain heretical. So during the 80s and 90s, I began to establish myself as an alternative scientist. And in the late 80s, starting then, I convened a number of conferences that we had, some in Estes Park, Colorado. This was through the offices of the International Association for New Science, which I was one of the co-founders and board members. And so during the 90s, we held a number of meetings, very important and crucial meetings. And one of them was on the subject of free energy or energy research and development that goes outside of the box of normal thinking and promises a future of breakthrough clean energy. And so that's sort of the history. But now we're at this incredible crossroads with what's happening in Japan with their nuclear disasters, what has been happening with the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, but also further back here in Ecuador where I live, Chevron Texaco left behind a huge mess in the Amazon jungle, killing thousands of people, permanently causing diseases because of the polluted water supply from the extraction of oil. So you add up all of these things, and there now is more than ever a tremendous groundswell of potential, if we only acknowledge it, to develop any one of several being researched clean breakthrough energy sources. So I've been kind of in the lead of that effort. I'm living in Ecuador now, and one reason for living in Ecuador is because it's less dangerous. There's been a lot of suppression, as your listeners, I'm sure, heard from Wade Frazier, a lot of suppression of this research, which promises clean energy for the huge future of humanity. And my God, the fact that the people aren't even acknowledging it, even people in the green movement, is just a shock to me, and it keeps me plenty busy, attempting to express just the urgency of having an Apollo type of program to research and develop clean energy sources.
Right. So in your years, you traveled. You traveled around the world, talking to people who had alternative energy ideas and concepts and working models and lab experiments. What did you find in that time?
That search was really life-changing for me because initially, like almost everybody, I was skeptical about the possibility that we could have basically free and clean energy that comes from the vacuum of space. That this was too science fiction-y. The mainstream scientists that I had rubbed elbows with most of my life clearly thought it was just a ridiculous idea and just way out there and not even worth thinking about. And my travels, and it was mostly late 80s, early 90s, was all over the world, and I visited many of the best and brightest inventors, people like John Hutchison from Canada, Troy Reed in the U.S., Shiuji Inamada from Japan, Paramahamsa Tiwari in India. And many of these people had basically research devices that showed proofs of concept of some of these technologies. So it occurred to me at that point that not only was this something that should be pursued and not suppressed, but that it's something that is absolutely essential for our global energy future. But it also has to be very responsibly implemented. And this is my greatest concern because, well, we now are learning more and more about the nuclear power story and how it promised to be this free and clean and cheap energy source back in the 50s after World War II, that this was going to be the answer to electricity generation. But now we can see the enormous dangers of that technology. So it's a process of elimination, basically, that I've been going through as a scientist, investigating each traditional energy source, whether it be any of the fossil fuels, coal, oil, or natural gas, or whether it be nuclear power, or whether it be hydropower, or solar, or wind power. If you go down the list of the alternatives that are now available, none of them, I hate to say, is going to cut it. It's just too many problems with each one. Mm-hmm. Even solar and wind. I mean, God bless the solar and wind people. I love the idea, but the problem is that the materials used for windmills and solar collectors would be so expensive to replace what we now use, which is almost all hydrocarbons or fossil fuels and nuclear energy. It's just not going to cut it. I'm sorry to say. I wish it were. Right. And but the fact that it isn't means this forces us into wanting to develop other alternatives. And so the other alternatives became very, very clear to me, both theoretically and experimentally, as a very real thing, but something that needs to be much further researched and understood by more people as a team effort. And that's the kind of thing I'd like to see happen. Right now, the people in this field, the researchers, are divided and ruled and suppressed and lead very, very dangerous lives because the powers that be simply don't want this to happen. It just upsets their vested interest too much.
What country do you find is the most open to this sort of technology? You've traveled around quite a bit. Have you seen sort of where the most open area for this sort of thing? Because I mean, they're called the global elite for a reason. They have global control. But do you see any other country out there in all of your travels that it's possible?
Well, that's the conundrum we're in, and I'm sure you remember how Wade described the conundrum, which is that well, my answer is no. I don't know of any country that is even aware of the possibility here, let alone wants to do it, besides maybe some of the black budgets, which, we don't know about or are not supposed to know about. So it's something which has been almost thoroughly suppressed at all levels and in all places. So obviously, I mean, I'm in Latin America now, and we're attempting to stir up interest here, but it's a long, slow process to educate some of the governments here. However, there is more openness here than there is, let's say, in the U.S., which has almost been totally suppressed.
What do you think of the cold fusion with Rossi down in Europe there?
Well, cold fusion is just one of the new energy technologies, and it's one of the more promising ones. And I can describe that a bit to your listeners as to what it is and what happened there. But in 1989, two University of Utah chemists, electrochemists, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pones, did a tabletop experiment in which they were able to create, through a special apparatus, what appeared to be non-radioactive nuclear reactions that occurred at room temperature in a tabletop experiment, which was really quite remarkable. It used a palladium catalyst in the presence of heavy water solution, and it produced more energy, thermal energy, than went into it as measured by traditional means. So that discovery led to a number of other confirmations that, even though in the popular press people get the impression that it's a stillbirth, that it doesn't work, that it's a fraud. Well, that's ridiculous. It isn't at all. In fact, there are many successful cold fusion experiments going on right now in a number of laboratories all around the world, and there is a a whole field built around it, annual conferences, a whole science that's built around the concept. But it's still being avoided by the mainstream culture. But cold fusion is just one of the technologies. There are several others as well.
The big one that's making a splash now is Rossi and Bucardi in Italy. They're making a big splash now with their the work they're doing in cold fusion.
I don't know if were you aware that about a week ago they made a claim that they had a unit working in a Greek factory, and for about a month, and it worked tremendously well, and they were now thinking that they can go into a commercial use within the next year.
Well, I'm very encouraged by that news, and we hear, not that let's hope that it works. See, here's the problem, and this is what people don't really realize. It's like on this technology, the Wright brothers have already flown. The original days of proof of concept, which the Wright brothers very clearly demonstrated in their initial airplane, was met with such great skepticism that it took years before their achievements were recognized and you could actually get the commercial, or shall we say just practical side of it implemented. The Wrights had a really rough time. They died poor. Scientific American wrote a scathing editorial 2 years after they first flew that that aviation was a fraud. And the same thing is going on with cold fusion and some of the other energy sources. So we get news about this person doing this or this person having that breakthrough, and we're on the verge of commercializing it. The word I prefer to use to commercialize is just implement, because by its very nature, this energy is free. We all deserve to have it, albeit in small packages, because it is decentralized as well. The point here being that I just encourage any and every inventor to just move forward on this, and part of my job is to coordinate the inventors and see if we can come together. And for that, of course, one needs quite a bit of funding. But the people with lots of money tend to be in another universe when it comes to that. So we're kind of poised conceptually to really make some breakthroughs and bring people together, and not have people also wait in their own competitive compartment, wait for the day when they can beat somebody else to the punch. Or I mean, this is too important for capitalism. We have to get moving on this, and the fact is that most people are not even aware of its possibility.
Yeah, that's a problem. Wade was talking about, called it scaling the walls of the free energy paradigm, and that it's not only is there a castle with a moat, there's also a minefield. And one of the first traps that people fall into is getting a patent. Well, getting a patent is just like painting a bullseye on your forehead, or submitting for a patent is, it puts the flag out that you're working in that area. I mean, it's just, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, and there is a growing consensus, that the patent process is so corrupted that people just shouldn't do that anymore. I mean, this is for the earth. It's not for personal gain. So people that are involved in this research need to give it away, basically.
Yeah, so it's a good idea, but they're using an old paradigm, and they should shoot more towards the open source sort of way of doing things.
Absolutely. At least the initial parts of it, because obviously there will be many technologies that will spin off from this. In a way, it's very similar to the information technology development, and we're in the very early years of this development, where the skepticism and denial still runs very, very high, but where there's a huge potential, and where it's very clear we're going to have clean energy, and anybody with any bit of intelligence can see for themselves just the enormous dangers posed by continuing to depend on hydrocarbons and uranium as our principal fuel sources.
Yeah, Japan. I mean, that's just a... Have you been following that?
Oh, you betcha. And it's a cliffhanger, and I'm not very optimistic. Even if they squeeze through this one with a minimum of death and damage, it still sends up a red flag. And it's a flag that I'm very familiar with because in 1975, when he ran for president, Morris Udall, he was an environmental congressman, I was his energy advisor. And the big issue then was nuclear energy. And the nuclear lobby wanted to build like 1,000 nuclear power plants in the U.S. by the year 2000. We were able to, through our congressional committee, stop that in its tracks. So now, instead of 1,000 nuclear power plants in the U.S., it's more like 100.
Okay.
And very roughly, I forget the exact number. I think it's a little more than that now. But the point here being that nuclear power plants are very unsafe by their very nature. We now know just in spades, even though these calculations had been done in the past, that any place that's earthquake prone or tsunami prone is not where to build a nuclear power plant. And yet they went ahead and did exactly that. And they also did a number of very, very fundamental mistakes, like leaving spent fuel rods in an open pool.
Right.
And now that they're dealing with those problems, which could be much more serious than we had first anticipated, in part because some of these fuel rods use plutonium, which is the most toxic of all the radioactive elements.
To think that we could have been beyond this, I mean, the free energy thing's been going on for a long time. So is the anti-gravity research. I remember Bedini being on Open Minds radio, and that was 15 years ago. And they were talking about it being just around the corner. That any day now that we're going to all have free energy, and there's absolutely nothing the powers that be can do. Well, guess what?
The powers that be are much more powerful than we've given them credit for when it comes to stuff like this, because it's so easy for the powers that be to go into a laboratory and sabotage it. And that's what has happened so often. So many horror stories. And it's been now over 100 years since the time of Nikola Tesla and Henry Moray and others, that we've had many, many brilliant inventors come along with a breakthrough free energy source, just to be later suppressed. And this has been such a horrible record. It's something which people need to become more aware of. Even people that are skeptical, because at least the skeptic can spend some time investigating the possibility of this. And even if we don't have a commercial device now, which I assert is primarily because of the suppression, it could be developed if we allow ourselves to transparently fund the research and development effort and bring people together in protected research and development centers. And then we could have another Apollo program, an Apollo program for free energy.
Can you imagine where this world would be right now if J.P. Morgan, instead of saying, where do I put the meter on that, said, sure, let's do it?
Well, we'd have a very different world. And the only thing I caution in all of this, of course, is that there are so many new energy technologies, so many, of which cold fusion is one. The so-called zero-point energy, sometimes it's called vacuum energy, is another. Some of the very special water and hydrogen chemistries. And these all lead to the same destination, which is energy that is basically free. And the only problem with that I see about moving ahead with this is that our leaders have become so irresponsible and so corrupted by the dirty energy that we're now using. I'm very concerned that they're going to miscarry this one too. And so people need to become aware and awake. And part of that, I'm involved now in an effort, kind of a last-ditch effort to create groups that can come together and propose new sovereign governance systems that would make sure we can go ahead and develop this in spite of the huge suppression effort that's been underway for 100 years.
And how is that working out?
Well, you have to start somewhere, right? And I've been dealing with or working some with another radio interviewer. His name is David Gibbons, Gibbons, okay, who is working with me on creating some of these concepts. Some of these ideas are posted on my website. I've thought about it for a long time because I began to realize that the disconnect between what's possible and what people are actually doing is so huge that we have to bridge that gap. We have to be able to research these things and have that research supported. The people doing this work are the real unsung heroes of our time. They're people that will go into history as, I think, the truly great people, but the ones that have gone against the grain. And of course, this has happened throughout history.
Right. I see one of two ways this can happen, and I like your way better. The one way would be for the powers that be to grab all their toys from their underground bases, the anti-gravity and the free energy, and pull them out to the surface, give them out to everybody and say, here you go. We've been suppressing this, but we figure it's time. We'll give everybody this technology. That's option A. Option B, I'm going to go with what you're saying. What do you think the chances are there?
Well, I just don't know because, this is we're plowing new ground. We've seen this suppression happen. We've seen the feasibility of many of these potential sources. So that's an observation that's very clearly established.
Right.
And so we have to do something new, something different. Well, one way to do it is to just get the word out so much where enough people are educated about the possibility that we insist upon it. Well, just like some of the recent democratic movements that have been going on in the Middle East and Wisconsin and other places, people are getting fed up with what's happening now. And clearly, it's across the board. It's not only in terms of dirty energy, but fighting wars and using genetically engineered organisms and so forth and so on. We're creating this artificial world that's just falling apart unless we do something radical soon. And we have to insist on that. And that's the effort that needs to be made now.
Well, we're sorry, but we got to take a quick break right now, and we'll see you guys on the other side.
Are you suffering from constant pain in the knee, shoulder, wrist, and other parts of your body? Needle-free acupuncture with Lipingo Life Pads may be the answer. Lipingo Life Pads combine ancient wisdom with modern nanotechnology and advanced engineering. They're designed to relieve pain naturally with no needles and no side effects. That's Lepingo, lipingoproducts.com.
Hello, this is Scott Jordan, and I would personally like to thank all of our listeners for their emails of encouragement. It means a great deal to us. All of Spectrum shows are available in two formats, an MP3 stream you can listen to on our site, as well as a YouTube version. All of Spectrum shows are full-length and free to listen to, and if I have my way, always will be. Tom and myself do all this work out of pocket, and freely give our time and effort to giving you, the listener, the best, most informative experience possible. I would also like to thank our listeners who have donated in the past to help with our expenses. Every donation goes directly to keeping the project alive. Thank you, enjoy, and keep listening.
You've always been told to think about the alternative. Well, we can do better. We can show you. AlternativeLifestyleProducts.com will improve your health, well-being, and lifestyle through hundreds of different products, from herbs and well-being products to our large selection of specialty clothing, jewelry, and more. We ship around the world with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. There's always new products and amazing specials. Let us show you at AlternativeLifestyleProducts.com.
Brian, do you really think now, from a realistic point of view, if somebody came out and gave this free energy for the people of the world, how is that going to change the economy of the world?
Well, the word economy is sometimes called the dismal science. It's a human-created system that is part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So I tend to not want to look at the economy as much as the ecology, because it's the natural ecology of the earth that is being destroyed by our very dirty practices. And so that's first and foremost. We have to insist that we develop clean technologies and not dirty technologies, technologies that work with nature rather than against nature. And those technologies are, by and large, suppressed because the powers that be want to keep their power. And if you really look at this just physically, not economically, you see just what a dreadful system that humans have created that are destroying nature and ourselves. And so what we have to do is make the economy fit the ecology, not the other way around. And now there are certainly a lot of ideas out there, good ones, about what to do about the economy. One of them is not to be hooked on growth anymore. Growth is part of what's ruining the world, because people, when they tend to go in a new venture, they externalize their costs. In other words, go for the resources, go pollute, do whatever you want there. And that's been the standard that has existed in our economic systems right up until now. That has to change. So you see, what I'm talking about here is a huge sea change in the global culture. The development of clean, breakthrough, decentralized, safe, publicly transparent energy, that prospect could change things overnight. We could have heaven on earth, as Wade sometimes says, if only we allow it to happen. But the people need to become aware of it. Now, people like Wade and I, with our decades of experience, know that it's possible. Some people might be skeptical that it isn't possible. Well, you can only find out by trying. And my world travels back in the late 80s, early 90s really was an eye-opener for me, because I, as a scientist, trained scientist, could see for myself that these things are possible. And that then led to the obvious conclusion that we need to research and develop these sources as soon as possible and come together and insist that this happen, and to make sure that this research is protected from the powers that be. The powers that be have really screwed up things badly, and now we have to do something about it.
Well, since we are in that sort of a conundrum right now, and countries like the oil-rich countries right now What would happen if we all of a sudden didn't need oil? What would happen to those countries? How would they survive, and how would that change, their thinking, or what would they do?
Well, it's paradigm shift time. You see, the problems are not technical; they're mostly social and political.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people do just fine if they just rely on their own local community, their local resources. There certainly can be a number of transition scenarios planned where you don't suddenly shut off the spigot. You phase it out while you phase in the new, and you carefully design those social systems and governments around that rather than the other way around. See, we have to get out of the old paradigm totally, and that is a tall order for many people. They just rather stick with what's familiar. But the day will come when we'll be running our cars, we'll be getting our electricity probably from tiny little solid-state devices that could be put in your circuit breaker box or under the hood of your car. That can only help the economy, at least a new paradigm economy, because then the energy sector suddenly becomes free or close to free compared to what it's been up until now, which is a huge percentage of the global economy is vested in polluting energy sources. That's got to change. And the other biggie, of course, are the weapons of war, plus unsustainable agriculture, the resource grab that's going on in the third world, the economic dependence of the poorer countries on the wealthier ones, the financial manipulations of the culture, the Goldman Sachses of the world that rely on business as usual so that they can make even more money. This is just unmitigated greed, and it needs to stop if we're going to survive these times.
Yeah. Now, do you think this situation happening now with the coal fusion, as we mentioned earlier, since the Greek government now, has taken it upon themselves to look more into it and do the testing, a country like Greece being in a terrible financial situation that they have been in the last little while, is it possible that this thing can become a reality now because of that?
Well, I can only hope so. I've heard so many stories like this that never came to fruition, and that doesn't mean that this one could break through. I'm sure there's obviously a huge pressure on the Greek government not to do this, and with all sorts of threatened reprisals. So it's a matter of moving ahead anyway. You do it anyway. And certainly I'm about to take a trip and talk with a number of government people in Ecuador and in Costa Rica, and there are other places too, that might accept this possibility. The only thing is that when you run these things up the flag to the powers that be, then there are very serious repercussions. So the powers that be are going to have to either fall under their own weight or just let go of this one. But it just means more and more people need to become aware. That's one reason why I'm on this show, is so that people can become more aware, and if they are skeptical, to do the research. It's the information is out there. There are all kinds of technologies, any one or some of which could do the job.
Right.
Sorry, Scott. How do we get a lot of people on a global scale to sort of stand up and create this movement?
Well, it's public sharing, that's for sure. Now, I've been bounced from the mainstream media time and time again about this. One time the BBC was approaching me saying that they were going to be doing a special on new energy sources, and they wanted to interview me, and I said, fine. Well, they ran it up to the executive producer, And he said no. And this is what happens. There's naysaying at every higher level. So it's got to be more the people, just the common, ordinary, everyday people, but also the scientists. Many scientists like myself, I had to make a clean break from mainstream science in order to be able to do this work at all. So we have been divided and ruled, and this has happened throughout history, by the way. And the Green Movement, likewise, people in the Green Movement are very, very effective at describing what isn't working. They're obviously, the anti-nuclear lobby will now be very, very emboldened by what's been happening in Japan, just like the anti-fossil fuel groups when the BP oil spill happened, and there's even more climate change indications going on in the acidification of the oceans and so forth. That we know that burning carbon is bad for our health, bad for the environment. All of these things collectively, if we tend to connect the dots and look at the big picture, we see that all of these alternatives are just pathetically, they fall way short of what we really need to do. So this information needs to get out there as widely as possible. And unfortunately, back in the old days, of course, I had no problem getting on CNN or BBC or any of the other major media sources, but they very clearly have censored this one.